This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 521 for June 15, 2017. Coming up on today's show, responding to Mayim Bialik. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Minx, coming at you solo today, but not without all kinds of delicious content. And that's not just because I've been making efforts to go through my Gmail inbox. Yep, we've got audio messages from 6 months ago that got buried in there. But I'm excited. And all the questions that you guys have asked, well, most of them are going to be addressed in the next couple of shows. So I'm actually looking forward to the next half dozen shows we got on the roster. But first, let's talk about what's going on this week. In our announcements this week, happy to report that Lusty Guy has been writing more articles for Swing Towns, including his latest on his swinging origin story. Now, you have heard his poly origin story here on the show, which is a bit lackluster because it's pretty much always been poly, but he has a fun little twist when he talks about his swinging origin story. I'll provide a link in the show notes at polyweekly.com or on the app if you have it. Our topic this week is a response to Mayim Bialik's video. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mayim Bialik is an actor who has been on, back in the day, she was Blossom on a really cheesy 80s sitcom. More recently, she has been on The Big Bang Theory. And one thing you may not know about her is that, yes, she does in fact have a PhD in neuroscience. And she also has a YouTube channel. And recently, she did a video blog entitled Open Relationships, where she rants for about 7 minutes about the fact that she doesn't get open relationships. Which is interesting because she starts out by talking about all the things that she does get about open relationships, and then proves that false in other parts of her video. So first of all, I would love to congratulate her for addressing this topic. She has a following. More and more people are becoming aware of non-monogamy, polyamory, and open relationships, and relationship anarchy as relationship options. So good for you, Mayim, for addressing the topic and talking about what you do and don't get about it. So she starts out by saying she gets that it's not just about sex, that it's about honesty, that sex is fun, that monogamy is a cultural construct, and then it's a way for women to free themselves from the patriarchy. So a pretty good start, right? Well, there's a lot that I'd like to address in the video. There are basically 6 myths about polyamory and non-monogamy that she falls prey to that I would like to respond to on our podcast today. Number 1, she says, hey, I get it, but then points out that most primates are monogamous. This is not true. Only about 3% of mammals in general are monogamous, and there are just a couple of monkeys that are monogamous, and the only apes that are monogamous are gibbons. So that's just flat out wrong. Most primates, in fact, most species around the world, are not monogamous. Myth number 2. She says she gets that it's not just about the sex, but then spends 90% of the next 7 minutes talking pretty much exclusively about the sex. So Mayim, I want to tell you, you're the one that's making it all about the sex. You say you get that it's not all about sex, but all of your examples, except for one, are about the sex. Then she goes on to make the argument that polyamorists, or people in open relationships, are exchanging one cultural construct for another and doing what she calls swapping male and female sexuality, and then goes into the whole millions of sperm versus one egg kind of argument. So now I'd like to bust myth number 3. Male sexuality does not equal promiscuity, and female sexuality does not equal lack of interest in sex. This has nothing to do with swapping, as you call it, male and female sexuality. This isn't about sexual dimorphism. It's about people's personal inclinations and wiring. There are plenty of women that want sex in multiple relationships, and there are plenty of men that want monogamy. So let's not equate one's own personal sexuality with all women. And by the way, I thought you got that this wasn't all about the sex. And while recreational sex is not an uncommon practice, remember the part where you said that you understood we have long-term loving committed relationships? Then she does spend a precious minute talking about emotional relationships, making the argument that emotional connections are really complicated. It requires a lot of time and attention. She barely has enough time for one relationship and her kids, so this couldn't possibly work. Myth number 4. Just because it wouldn't work for you doesn't mean it wouldn't work for anyone else. You're absolutely right when you say that emotional connections are important and complicated. But as you've discovered by choosing a mate and choosing to have kids and spend time with them, emotional connections are worth the trouble. And it's up to the individual to determine how many emotional connections and what types of emotional connections are right for that individual person. You make time for your kids because you love them, and being with them enriches your life and makes you a better version of yourself. Non-monogamous people make time for additional relationships because they love those people, and having those people in their life enriches them and makes them better versions of themselves. Then she goes on to literally shake her finger at people saying, I know you're having sex without protections, and you're basically saying that you're at high risk for STIs. Myth number 5. Non-monogamous people are at high risk for STIs. Wrong. The people who are high risk for STIs or those who are uneducated about transmission, those who don't get tested, and those who let shame guide their decisions rather than scientific fact. I shake my finger at you, Mayim. You should know better. You assume that non-monogamous folks are at higher risk for STIs due to this apparent Ferris wheel of partners we have rotating in and out of our lives. In fact, STI rates in the sex-positive communities, such as polyamorous, non-monogamous, and relationship anarchists, tend to be much lower due to education, open and honest communication about them, and a lack of shame. Myth number 6. People practice polyamory because they're unhappy in their current relationships. Wrong. Well, okay, to be fair, some people do that, but it doesn't work any more than having a child fixes a relationship that you're unhappy in. The truth is that most people practice polyamory, non-monogamy, or what have you because it's who they are and because they feel it's the truest versions of themselves. It is not generally because their current relationship is unhealthy. And if they do try it for that reason, they very quickly discover it does not provide happiness. And Mayim seems to believe that the only reason one would be poly is if first of all, you start as a couple, which isn't true. We have lots of solo polyamorous out there who self-identify as poly outside of any relationship. Or because you're unsatisfied with your current monogamous relationship, so why not, quote, spice it up with more sex? Oh, again, remember how you said that you got that it wasn't all about the sex, but then you kept making it about the sex? There is one thing that Mayim definitely gets correct, and I want to applaud her for this. It is true that emotional relationships are valuable, they are complicated, and they require a tremendous deal of time and attention. And, as she points out, emotional bonds are strengthened by facing challenges together with your partner. That is all true. And while it works for Mayim to have one partner and kids and to face the world that way, it works equally well for many people to have more than one partner and to have kids or not to have kids and to go through those challenges in life and strengthen those bonds with the people of their choosing. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the video and leave your reply in the comments. And we had 2 bits of audio feedback on the New York Times Magazine article from a few weeks ago. Take a listen.
Hi, Ken and Minx, long-time listener, first-time caller. I just had a comment about the New York Times article. My husband and I, who have had a healthy poly relationship for almost 20 years, also got interviewed for the article. We each have longtime partners as well. We're not in a closed polycule, but we definitely make healthy communicative decisions together, and we talk about everything, and there's a lot of openness and communication and scheduling, and they did come out and interview us and, wanted to put us in a video and all that. I'm actually, even though it's very sad that the article didn't really capture the true spirit of polyamory, I actually think I'm actually glad that my information wasn't used, and I'm pretty sure that, I'm glad that I wasn't put into that article, because I don't want to be grouped with that group of people that ends up cheating and then, it becomes an open marriage. Obviously there need to be more fair articles written about it, but it's nice that it's starting to be written about, and hopefully the more that gets written about it, the more real stories will come out. Thanks.
Hey, Minx, it's Amy Guerin, also known as Aggie Says, from Off the Escalator, offescalator.com. First thing, great job on your Ignite presentation. You totally rocked it. I was so happy to see it. I shared it with a bunch of my friends. But the real reason I'm calling is about episode 518. Great job talking to Kevin and Ruby about the issues with the New York Times Magazine cover story on open marriages. You guys made all the right points, and that's great. I would just like to bring a little bit of additional context to that. I am a journalist, and I know a lot of people who have written for big magazine publications like the New York Times Magazine. And a couple of things to consider. I believe it was Ruby who made the point that they might want to get beyond Poly 101 to Poly 201. Let's talk about Journalism 101 here. This was an almost 13,000 word article. That is long, even by cover story feature terms for the New York Times Magazine. This journalist had a year to work on it, and she did dozens of interviews, most of which were not included. Now, that's not unusual for the process, but Journalism 101, when you're covering an issue, get direct on-the-record quotes from all constituencies directly involved or impacted. And in this article, 13,000 words, there were only 2 quotes that were from the people who were not the married partners. And that is really glaring. Especially one of them was just a very brief kind of in passing direct quote. The other one wasn't even a direct quote. It was quoted from an email that Joseph sent to Elizabeth. And it's not even clear whether Joseph had permission. I am just wondering what the editors were missing on that, because that's a pretty major oversight in terms of editorial policy for any news organization. I would have kicked that right back and said, we need quotes from some of the people involved. When you think about it, the whole premise of the story about an open marriage is that other people were involved. This story really kind of highlighted whose voices are supposed to count and whose don't in consensual non-monogamy. A very couple-centric perspective. The only voices that get heard, with a couple of minor exceptions, which I mentioned, are the people in the married couple. That's an issue. I'm going to put together a guide from my media colleagues as to how to avoid some of these common pitfalls. But just within the context of how a newsroom works, what the hell happened there? I would really love to talk to the editors about that. Anyway, thank you for your discussion on it, and take care. Bye.
And Aggie says, if you do put together a media guide for your journalist colleagues, please, please, please share that. I will provide it on my site.
It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly polyamorists everywhere.
This week's Happy Poly Moment of the Week is from Free, who wrote, Our small pod has been through a lot of big changes over the last year, culminating in one of my partners, Jay, and her young daughter moving in with me over the summer, and then my starting grad school. It's been a challenging transition, especially for my other partner, S, who's been unsure of her role or whether this constitutes a de facto hierarchy. We're avoiding hierarchies for as long as I've been seeing either of them. Everyone gets along, even loves one another, but change is hard and scary, and I in particular don't always have time to talk through things as well as we'd like. The longer we go without finding ways to reintegrate men in more time, the scarier it becomes. Last week, S was throwing a big party, and we arranged for me to stay over the whole weekend to shore up some extra time. The day after the party, S and I were driving around when Jay called out of the blue and told me her daughter was sick and they needed help. We raced over. On the way, S and I agreed that taking care of the kiddo was everyone's top priority, followed closely by being there for Jay. We didn't want to overwhelm Jay if she was still freaking out, so S walked around the neighborhood while I scoped out the situation. Jay and her daughter were in the back of the house cleaning up, and everything seemed fine. I asked if they needed anything, and Jay asked me to make a coffee run. While S and I were on the coffee run, the poor kiddo threw up again, and the whole cycle started over again. When we got back, I encouraged S to come inside while I drove into my first big cleanup as an assistant parent. Jay greeted S, and they chatted about mom stuff. Later, Jay's daughter came out and found S on the porch. First Jay, then I told her it was our close friend, S. She sent you a birthday present, remember? And she could go say hello. Next thing we knew, she was chatting S's ear off like she's known her forever. We were all worried that the kiddo might get sick again, but S and I were hungry, so we three strategized about somewhere close that S and I could get dinner, but also be available in case of a round 3. Everyone hugged and parted a little closer, and when round 3 did not happen, we all went on with our weekend as planned. Isn't it strange what a sick kid can do for a group? Well, Free, that is an amazing story of cooperation and being smart about how to deal with a situation that could be awkward. I love that you scoped things out, you did a project plan, you planned your priorities, you were flexible, and one thing I always say, and keep in mind, I don't have kids, but kids are way more flexible and open-minded than adults are. So most of the things that we're worried about kids knowing, they already know. And the things we're worried about kids accepting, they're way more accepting than most adults are. So yeah, it is strange what a sick kid can do for a group. Well, that about wraps it up for our show this week. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, email polyweekly@gmail.com, call 802-505-POLY. If you'd like to book us to speak at your next event, lustyguy@polyweekly.com. That's the email. He will respond within a day, as opposed to me, who will respond within 6 months. And I want to thank everyone who sent me the link to Mayim's video, and to everyone who called in their comments this week, and basically everybody who's emailed me and been so patient in waiting for a response. I love you guys. One of the benefits of being fun employed is that I actually do have time and energy to go through and make Polyweekly a little bit better for you. And that does make me happy. That being said, thanks for listening. And remember, I'm talking to you, Mayim. It's not all about the sex.